my name is Bill Marion, and this is A Nose for Life. In this video, we're talking about that time the CIA attacked the UFO problem. I'm referring to the recently released CIA files pertaining to UFOs that go all the way back to the early 1950s. This is part 2, and you don't necessarily have to watch part 1 to appreciate the information in this video, but it would be helpful, and here's why. Context is everything, and as I'll further explain in this video, knowing the historical context in which these files were prepared is essential in understanding these documents. Part 1 attempts to summarize and contextualize the information, but in this video I'm providing my assessment of the origins of the CIA's attack on the UFO phenomena. And let me be clear, in both videos I'm barely scratching the surface. There are a lot of documents. I'm focusing on the CIA's handling of the UFO problem. You really need to watch this video until the end because it's the only way to understand my assessment without jumping to any conclusions. This is a new series for our channel, and I'll be making several more videos on the topic over the next few months while still making videos about our crazy outdoor adventures. While you're watching this video, please feel free to comment as often as you like. I try to respond to every comment on every video. Now let's begin. When I'm reading through these documents, I place myself in the shoes of someone in the CIA during this time. So, I'm in the CIA in 1952, and I'm a team player. Like I mentioned earlier in the last video, the late 1940s and 50s was a prosperous time with amazing leaps in technology in a very short amount of time. But it was also a time of paranoia, fear, and the possibility of nuclear war that would eradicate humanity. Since I'm on the CIA team, my job is to protect the U.S. Specifically, my job is to collect and analyze foreign intelligence and conduct covert action. As a CIA agent or official, I'm always remembering that U.S. policymakers, including the President of the United States, make policy decisions informed by the information I provide. While reading these documents, imagining myself to be an agent for the CIA in the late 1940s and 50s, I'm reading through the official UFO sightings that are being reported through ATTACK, or Air Technical Intelligence Center, a special project through the Air Force. CIA agents aren't actually seeing UFOs, not according to these documents. The CIA is assessing UFO information it's receiving from a variety of sources, including ATTACK, who is investigating UFO sightings on a case-by-case basis. So, as an imaginary Cold War CIA agent, I'm not the one seeing the UFOs. But I'm reading these reports that have been documented by Air Force officers in the field. And this is how I try to examine these documents, through the eyes of CIA agents and officers at the time. In doing so, it doesn't take long to realize that the CIA is in a serious predicament. Maybe even a crisis, though the word crisis is never used. What do you do when civilians, trained pilots, and even radar operators are reporting unidentified flying objects over the territory you've sworn to protect by providing detailed analysis? What's so seldom discussed by the UFO community, and UFO skeptics for that matter, is that UFO sightings were a big problem for the U.S. intelligence apparatus. For the CIA, the UFO situation wasn't cute or exciting, it was a problem. The UFO phenomena indicated a failure in U.S. intelligence, and make no mistake, the CIA calls the UFO phenomena a problem. As I'm reading through these documents, I must restrain myself from any confirmation bias, or the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of my existing beliefs or theories. Simply stated, the documents say what they say and nothing more. I said the same thing about confirmation bias in the last video, but I held something back. We hear this term confirmation bias all the time these days, but here's the thing. There's no such thing as removing all or even most confirmation bias while doing research. Yes, the documents say what they say, but you are who you are when reading these documents, and that's not going to change. I spent a lot of time in the first video contextualizing. In doing so, even though I have some paperwork that suggests that I know a thing or two about history, bias is going to sneak into any investigation, including my own credible knowledge about the era. Because I wasn't alive in 1952, and for those of you watching this video who were alive in 1952, first, thanks for watching, but it's unlikely that you were in the CIA, and if you were in the CIA, thanks for watching, I think. Please don't make me disappear because of this video. Anyway, my opinion about these documents is partially based on the experience, research, thoughts, and ideas of other people. Everyone from my parents, grandparents, history teachers, history books, college professors, the History Channel, science fiction movies, more science fiction movies, and maybe a little more science fiction movies, and yes, even this guy. All of this influences the way I interpret the information in these files. Why is this important? because CIA agents documenting and assessing UFO reports were also biased. And not just biased in their own personal opinions, but biased according to their actual job. The CIA is supposed to be a little paranoid, concerned, and overly cautious. And there's a reason to be concerned. Think about it, almost all the technology being used at the time is new and still a little unreliable. Spotting enemy aircraft by sight was still extremely important. The main thing the CIA is worried about is the Soviet Union. That's the biggest threat. Despite the number of UFO sightings, UFOs have not attacked or caused any collateral damage. And based on these documents, UFOs have made no contact or made any indication that they're a threat. So people were seeing UFOs, but as a Cold War CIA agent in the 1950s, we would also know that the number of aircraft being produced and flying is increasing exponentially. This includes jets that were still new and other experimental aircraft that would be unfamiliar to the average person. Commercial aviation was just getting off the ground, but it was doing so in a big way, and military aircraft are flying around the clock all over the US and all over the world. Remember, the sound barrier was broken back in 1947, so sonic booms are being heard all over the country for the first time. And to be fair, there were many expert observers who reported seeing actual UFOs, including private, commercial, and military pilots. But there are also those other people. You know, people. The people who exaggerate or just lie. And I'm not even talking about people who stage a UFO hoax. Believe it or not, most hoaxes were debunked quickly. On a side note, hoaxes aren't mentioned as often as you would think in these documents. Anyway, what is discussed is the public's contagious fascination. It only takes one publicized UFO event to send hundreds of people to do some stargazing for the first time. They see a shooting star and then report it as a UFO. Making matters worse for the CIA, Hollywood is beginning to crank out UFO movies every summer. And UFOs are turning out to be big money. The commercialization of the UFO phenomena means that there is a financial interest in UFOs. In other words, UFOs were monetized. You must keep all of this in mind as UFO reports pour into the CIA. UFOs aren't going away anytime soon, and now that money is involved, it's going to get even bigger. Almost all of the reports are explainable. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the CIA, the President of the United States makes policy decisions informed by the information you're providing. By 1952, thousands of UFO reports are coming in, and you have to do something because people in high positions of authority in the U.S. government are wanting answers. So what do you do? The CIA is the world's premier intelligence agency, so yes, they took the issue seriously. Yes, they referred to UFOs as a problem, but the problem wasn't flying saucers or little green men or the Greys or whatever. For the CIA, the real problem was making sure that the U.S. airspace was protected. The ability to identify enemy aircraft was serious business. Radar had come a long way, but it was still a very new technology, full of kinks that needed to be worked out. Another concern was whether UFO sightings were actually the Soviets. And if that was the case, the Soviets were advancing faster than the U.S. in aerospace technology, and that was enough for the CIA to attack the UFO problem. Before 1953, the prospect of UFOs being extraterrestrial is mentioned at the beginning of the investigation, along with atmospheric phenomena that was not yet understood.
These aspects are to determine definitely the nature of the various phenomena which are causing these sightings, and to discover means by which these causes and their visual or electronic effects may be identified immediately. The CIA consultant stated that these solutions would probably be found on the margins or just beyond the frontiers of our present knowledge in the fields of atmospheric and ionospheric and extraterrestrial phenomena.
There's every indication in these memos that many UFO sightings were valid, being seen by multiple credible witnesses. But the CIA's validation of even a single UFO sighting was eventually seen as a problem. Internally, the agency was conflicted in how to handle UFOs, but this wasn't limited to the agency. UFO fascination was filtering through the entire military establishment. Communication channels throughout the military were being clogged with reports of UFOs and sightings and false alarms. The CIA goes as far as to call the UFO phenomena the cultivation of a morbid national psychology. The potential threat also being that another nation could use UFOs to induce hysterical behavior. Interest in UFOs was just as much in the intelligence and military communities as it was with the public. As highly trained and professional as the CIA was and is, they're just like everyone else. They had their own personal bias when assessing UFO sightings, and their personal bias was affecting the agency's ability to properly ascertain the actual threat, if any. The reports were sometimes sensationalized, capturing the imagination of some of the agents. Reading through the memos before and even after the 1953 memo that declared UFOs not of any interest to the CIA, it's obvious that not everyone on the team was of the same opinion on the matter, which makes sense because people are people. The panel of scientists that were formed from outside the agency were provided with all the information pertaining to UFOs and even shown motion pictures of UFOs. They were impressed, but not with UFOs. Rather, the scientists were impressed with the lack of evidence and sound data.
What? Oh no.
Scientists need evidence that can be measured, predicted, and reproduced. When we hear officials stating something like, there is no evidence to support the existence of UFOs, they're not saying that people aren't seeing anything, they're just saying that there is nothing measurable, predictable, or can be reproduced under specific conditions. The panel concluded that it was dangerous to allow the military to foster the concerns of the public over meandering lights.
The public concern with the phenomena, which is reflected both in the United States press and in the pressure of inquiry upon the Air Force, indicates that a fair proportion of our population is mentally conditioned to the acceptance of the incredible. In this fact lies the potential for the touching off of mass hysteria and panic. The scientific panel recommends that the national security agencies take immediate steps to strip the unidentified flying objects of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired.
But there's another aspect of these documents that must be examined, and I admit, I'm biased when sharing this bit of information. While the CIA is investigating the UFO phenomena, they are fully aware of its potential in psychological warfare. It just so happens that the CIA was focusing a lot of resources into psychological warfare research. This is disturbing, far more than anything else in these documents. The public's ongoing 70-year enthusiasm and passion about UFOs is well documented, and it's obvious to anyone who pays attention to, well, television and movies. That the CIA would consider using UFOs to conduct psychological warfare is the real conspiracy in these documents, and it hasn't received enough attention considering how often it's mentioned. We assume that psychological warfare would be used in a war waged against U.S. enemies, but using these methods would need to be researched and rehearsed. And you begin to wonder how many sightings in the years since were manufactured directly or indirectly by the agency. After all, if any entity has the means to pull off the ultimate hoax, it would be the CIA. With their budget, assets, and resources, they could pull off some pretty amazing light shows. It bothers me that the CIA would consider toying with the emotions of people who are so passionate about the topic regardless as to whether it's real or imagined. But worse, I haven't addressed a pretty big elephant in the room. We will never know with 100% certainty that these documents released by the CIA, and perhaps more from the Pentagon in the months to come, are everything the government has to offer on UFOs for two reasons. First, because of the way the UFO phenomena was handled, and I'll talk more about that later in this video. Second, because of the well-documented mind control programs like MKUltra. And if the CIA was willing to use the UFO phenomena in psychological warfare, then how do we know that this entire UFO information dump isn't a way to plant seeds in the public's consciousness about UFOs? I've been talking about this information at face value and choosing to present it as documented facts to the best of my ability. But I admit there's no way of knowing for sure that we can take the CIA or the Pentagon completely at their word that these documents are the final word on the matter. Just a few years after the CIA formed their official policy pertaining to UFOs, a brilliant scientist by the name of Dr. Leon Davidson became convinced that the CIA was using the UFO phenomena in psychological warfare. Dr. Davidson worked on the Manhattan Project and later did research that will eventually be developed into the technology that we're all using right now. Davidson created quite a stir for the CIA and pressured the CIA, Air Force, and eventually Congress to release Project Blue Book number 14. The CIA found Davidson to be a nuisance and they gave him the runaround. But Davidson believed that all UFOs could be explained rationally. But he also believed that the UFO phenomena could be used in population manipulation and in psychological warfare. Words matter, and the CIA loves using the word phenomena in these memos. We can define the word phenomena as a fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause or explanation is in question. The CIA's use of the word phenomena isn't an accident. In using the word phenomena, the CIA of this period, and even now for that matter, is telling us their official stance on UFOs. When it comes to official, credible UFO sightings, the CIA doesn't know what they are. And in 1953, the CIA chooses a "it's not our job unless it's a threat" strategy in an attempt to stay out of the conversation altogether. So sometimes these documents seem intentionally vague, especially after 1953. Not that anything is being hidden, but as if the various writers are making sure that they are not sensationalizing or validating a report or a request for information. And this becomes the CIA's strategy in dealing with the UFO phenomena for the past 70 years. And it was a terrible strategy. And make no mistake, these memos make it clear that the CIA's response to UFO sightings was based on the suggestions by a scientific panel, and the strategy that followed was well planned and executed. And to an extent, it worked. The public stopped looking to the government for answers, and pilots stopped reporting UFOs for the most part. But the plan had consequences that the scientists didn't consider in their recommendations. The CIA has the credibility of being the nation's top experts. But by saying nothing or being vague and avoiding the subject and hiding these documents all these years and the hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings since, instead of demystifying UFOs, they placed them in a mystery box. And imaginations gave UFOs a life entirely independent of these initial sightings. And imaginations cannot be locked up in a file. If you go to the website where these documents are available for download, there's a summary of what you're getting. A part of the description tells us that included in these memos are how the agency handled UFO sightings. There are so many ways to describe these memos, but in my opinion, the agency is drawing our attention to these early memos. Maybe it's an apology, confession, or an admission not of guilt, but of mismanagement. Maybe they're pointing our attention to the handling of the UFO problem as a way of saying, we've not been hiding UFOs. We've been hiding the way we handled the UFO problem. And maybe it's not exactly the way I'm describing it here, but I think I'm close. I think the U.S. intelligence apparatus and the military in general is trying to restart the conversation under different terms. For over 70 years, the military and intelligence community, well, they've been the UFO information gatekeepers. What if the biggest secret is that the only thing hiding behind the gates are the stories we've given them? What if the government doesn't know any more about UFOs than we do? So what's your opinion about all this craziness? How do you feel about these files and UFOs in general? Let us know in the comments. There are thousands of these pages that I still have to go through. We're barely past 1954, so I'm planning on making more videos about these documents over the next several months. But for now, it's time for us to return to making videos about our adventures in the mountains, exploring nature, and experiencing life. But I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Please click the like and subscribe button. My name is Bill Marion, and this is A Nose for Life. Hey, if you have time, check out some of these other videos. So you're still here? Click one of these videos.